It's like, yes, I did care for him, I did, but till I found out his true colors, that all went out the window, you know?
Prove that he also fathered your 1-month-old son, Adonis. The trust you had for Miss Perry went out the window once you learned you were not the only man climbing through hers. That you are not Adonis's father, and encourage Miss Perry to go find who is.
Because he's too busy hanging around with his homeboys, getting into every other woman he can find.
It's never about the kid. It's always about, oh, you want to be with me.
That's a lie. Regardless what happens between me and you, it's about our kids. That's all I ever wanted for you. If you don't have no money, then spend time. That's all you got to do. I never made it hard for you to see your kids. I was always there for him. He cannot say that. I don't know what type of vendetta he got against me. It's not about you, man. It's not about you.
You say he just doesn't have time because he's running around with his...
Claiming him, so which one you with? I'm not finna be a part of that triangle. You think you really that good? You not that good, man.
What is
You're not. You're not.
This court-centered story unfolds under the authority of Judge Lauren Lake, where multiple families arrive carrying years of doubt, resentment, and unanswered questions. The description explains what is happening inside the courtroom in clear terms, focusing on how truth is pursued through evidence, how emotions surface at the evidence stage, and how legal outcomes reshape real lives. At the center of the proceedings is the use of DNA testing, a tool that repeatedly proves that truth changes everything, even when people regret taking the test. The court hears from several mothers, alleged fathers, adult children, and witnesses, each presenting their version of events. The judge carefully controls the courtroom, reminding everyone that this is not about personal attacks, but about establishing facts. The relationship between law and justice becomes clear as Judge Lauren Lake balances compassion with strict adherence to evidence. Each case demonstrates how jurisprudence is applied in real life, not in theory, and how the concept of justice in jurisprudence directly affects families. In the first matter, a mother explains that she believes one man fathered both of her children. She describes a complicated relationship that began casually and continued without formal commitment. The alleged father admits to intimacy, but insists that doubt entered his mind because of behavior he observed over time. This doubt becomes the foundation for his refusal to fully accept responsibility. The court acknowledges that doubt alone is not evidence, which is why a DNA test is ordered. The evidence stage in the divorce case-style proceeding becomes the turning point, as scientific results replace speculation. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that adverse inference in Evidence Act principles apply when people avoid clarity. The court makes it clear that refusing to test or delaying truth only harms the children involved. When the DNA results are revealed, the courtroom learns that one child is biologically his, while the other is not. This outcome shocks both parents and demonstrates why people regret taking DNA tests, not because the test is wrong, but because the truth can be painful and irreversible. The judge explains that DNA does not erase emotional bonds, but it does define legal responsibility, especially regarding Supreme Court child support standards. One child becomes entitled to financial and parental support, while the other requires the mother to confront a different reality. The court documents show how one result creates obligation while the other dissolves it. This contrast reinforces how law operates without emotion, even when emotions run high. The next case involves an adult son who has spent his life unsure whether the man paying child support is truly his father. The father explains how rumors, financial strain, and alleged infidelity caused him to doubt paternity. He describes years of paying support, including jail time for falling behind, which he claims destroyed his stability. This testimony aligns with many stories featured in DNA test cheating stories and the game-changing attorney podcast discussions, where legal assumptions carry long-term consequences. The son speaks openly about growing up without a consistent father figure. He describes watching other families, seeing fathers present in their children's lives, and feeling abandoned. His testimony highlights why the court is not only a legal arena, but also a place where emotional damage is finally acknowledged. Judge Lauren Lake stresses that paternity is not just about money, but about identity and responsibility. When the DNA results are revealed, they confirm that the man is indeed the biological father. This moment reflects the core theme often discussed in Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes. The father's doubts are resolved, but the emotional cost of years lost cannot be undone. The judge urges the father to step forward, reminding him that legal confirmation is meaningless without action. The adult son is given space to express his anger and disappointment, making it clear that truth alone does not heal wounds. Another case focuses on a man accused by multiple women of fathering their children. He claims that his reputation has been damaged by false allegations and seeks DNA testing to clear his name. The mother counters by describing a relationship marked by deception, hidden marriages, and emotional manipulation. She explains that she carried the pregnancy believing in commitment, only to discover conflicting truths later. This situation mirrors discussions from the Divorce Course podcast, where lack of transparency undermines trust and fuels legal conflict. The court reviews financial records, receipts, and childcare expenses. Judge Lauren Lake explains that once paternity is established, child support is not optional. The evidence stage demonstrates how documentation, not emotion, determines outcomes. When DNA results confirm paternity, the judge orders financial compensation and ongoing responsibility, reinforcing the authority of Supreme Court child support principles. Throughout the proceedings, the judge addresses broader issues such as accountability, personal conduct, and the long-term impact of denial. The courtroom becomes a space where celebrate recovery testimonies emerge organically as individuals confront their mistakes publicly. Some accept responsibility with relief, while others struggle to process outcomes that contradict their beliefs. Adoption stories' full episodes are indirectly echoed in these cases, as the court discusses how children deserve stability, honesty, and care regardless of biological outcomes. Judge Lauren Lake makes it clear that when biology fails to align with assumptions, the law still prioritizes the child's welfare. The court repeatedly emphasizes that adults must resolve their conflicts without using children as leverage. The description highlights that no dramatic scenes are required to understand the weight of these moments. The tension comes from silence before results, from the reading of documents, and from the realization that a single envelope can redefine family structures. This is why people regret taking DNA tests, not because the court is unfair, but because the truth cannot be negotiated. Across all cases, the consistent theme is responsibility. Whether through confirmation or exclusion, the court ensures clarity. The relationship between law and justice is shown not as abstract theory, but as a living process where fairness is pursued through evidence. Judge Lauren Lake's role is not to punish emotions, but to anchor decisions in facts. By the end of these proceedings, some families leave with answers they sought for years, while others leave with new questions about healing and co-parenting. The court does not promise closure, only truth. And in every case, the message remains clear. DNA testing is a powerful tool. The law is uncompromising, and once evidence speaks, life must move forward under its weight. The courtroom narrative continues as Judge Lauren Lake maintains firm control over proceedings that repeatedly show how unresolved relationships eventually collide with the justice system. Each new case reinforces that the court is not a place for speculation, but for proof, and that the evidence stage is where stories either stand or collapse. The description explains how participants arrive believing they already know the truth, only to discover that belief and fact are often very different things. As the court moves forward, Judge Lauren Lake addresses a pattern that has appeared across multiple cases: informal relationships without boundaries, lack of communication, and assumptions replacing responsibility. She explains that when people avoid clarity, they create legal consequences that follow them for years. This principle is closely tied to the adverse inference in evidence act, where avoidance or delay can be interpreted against a party. The court repeatedly stresses that refusing DNA testing does not stop the truth. It only postpones accountability. One of the central discussions revolves around how DNA testing has changed modern family law. The judge outlines how, in earlier decades, paternity was often assumed based on marriage or acknowledgement alone. Now, science plays a decisive role. This shift is why many legal analysts featured on the Game Changing Attorney podcast describe DNA evidence as one of the most powerful tools in contemporary jurisprudence. In this courtroom, that power is visible in every sealed envelope. The description highlights how emotions rise when participants realize the court will not base decisions on sympathy alone. Mothers explain their struggles as single parents, detailing financial hardship, emotional exhaustion, and the fear of raising children without support. Fathers speak about doubt, betrayal, and feeling trapped by obligations they believe may not be theirs. Judge Lauren Lake listens carefully but repeatedly reminds them that the concept of justice in jurisprudence requires impartiality. Pain is acknowledged, but facts remain supreme. In one matter, the court examines how inconsistent involvement damages children more than absence. Evidence shows that sporadic appearances, unfulfilled promises, and emotional withdrawal create confusion and resentment. The judge explains that the law recognizes not just financial neglect but emotional inconsistency as a serious issue. While the court cannot mandate love, it can enforce responsibility, particularly when DNA confirms parentage. The role of Supreme Court child support guidelines becomes central as financial records are reviewed. Judge Lauren Lake explains how child support is calculated, why arrears accumulate quickly, and how failure to comply can lead to jail time, wage garnishment, and long-term financial instability. These explanations mirror discussions often heard on the Divorce Course podcast, where legal experts warn that ignoring support obligations rarely ends well. The description also covers how adult children are affected when paternity questions linger into adulthood. Testimony from grown sons and daughters reveals identity struggles, resentment, and feelings of abandonment. Judge Lauren Lake gives space for these voices, making it clear that the court recognizes emotional harm even when the law cannot repair the past. These moments align with themes explored in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledgement becomes the first step toward healing. Another recurring element is how social media and casual relationships complicate modern paternity disputes. Several parties describe meeting online, maintaining undefined relationships, and continuing intimacy without commitment. The court notes that while technology changes how people connect, it does not change legal responsibility. This observation reinforces the idea that truth changes everything podcast discussions often emphasize. Modern tools increase access, but they also increase accountability. As DNA results are revealed in successive cases, reactions vary widely. Some individuals express relief, believing their doubts are finally resolved. Others experience visible shock, realizing that long-held assumptions were wrong. Judge Lauren Lake addresses these reactions directly, reminding the courtroom that regret does not invalidate truth. This is where the phrase "people regret taking DNA tests" becomes more than a headline. It becomes a lived reality. The judge also explains how paternity findings affect future legal options, including custody, visitation, and adoption considerations. When a man is excluded as a biological father, the court clarifies that emotional bonds may still exist, but legal rights do not automatically follow. Conversely, when paternity is confirmed, legal responsibility begins immediately. These explanations echo themes from Adoption Story's full episodes, where biology and parenting do not always align neatly. Throughout the proceedings, the court emphasizes transparency. Judge Lauren Lake challenges participants who shift narratives or contradict earlier statements. She points out inconsistencies in timelines, financial claims, and relationship histories. This careful scrutiny demonstrates how courts evaluate credibility, not through emotion, but through consistency and corroboration. The description underscores that these cases are not isolated incidents, but part of a broader societal pattern. The courtroom becomes a reflection of how avoidance, denial, and misinformation create legal crises. The judge repeatedly states that the law does not punish honesty, it punishes evasion. This message aligns with the relationship between law and justice, where fairness depends on cooperation with the truth-finding process. As the second segment concludes, the audience understands that each case builds upon the last, reinforcing the same lesson. DNA evidence brings clarity, but clarity carries consequences. Families leave the courtroom changed, some with relief, others with responsibility they can no longer escape. Judge Lauren Lake's role remains constant, firm, empathetic, and unwavering in her commitment to evidence over emotion. The court does not offer reconciliation guarantees or emotional closure. It offers resolution grounded in fact. And as each envelope is opened, the message grows stronger. Once truth is revealed, denial is no longer an option, and life must move forward under the weight of verified reality. As the courtroom proceedings reach their final stage, Judge Lauren Lake brings focus back to the purpose of the court: resolution through verified truth. By this point, every participant understands that emotions, explanations, and accusations have all been heard, but only evidence determines outcomes. The description clarifies that the final phase is not about drama, but about consequences, accountability, and how the law settles questions that people avoided for years. Judge Lauren Lake summarizes patterns that have emerged across the cases. She explains that many of the disputes stem from relationships without structure, verbal promises without legal grounding, and repeated assumptions that responsibility could be delayed or avoided. The court emphasizes that DNA testing exists precisely because memory, emotion, and belief are unreliable. This principle aligns closely with discussions often raised in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where legal experts highlight that certainty replaces chaos once scientific proof enters the equation. The final rulings reinforce how the evidence stage transforms personal conflict into legal clarity. Once DNA results are entered into the record, arguments lose their power. The judge explains that the law does not weigh who feels wronged more, it weighs facts. This approach reflects the core relationship between law and justice, where fairness depends on consistency rather than sympathy. Participants who attempted to reshape their stories after results are reminded that the court operates on record, not revision. Financial responsibility becomes a dominant theme as Judge Lauren Lake addresses child support outcomes. She explains how confirmed paternity triggers immediate legal obligations under Supreme Court child support standards. These obligations include ongoing payments, arrears repayment, and possible enforcement actions if compliance fails. The court makes clear that once paternity is confirmed, support is not negotiable, regardless of personal conflict between parents. This explanation mirrors legal breakdowns often discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, where avoidance only deepens financial damage. For those excluded as biological fathers, the court clarifies the legal consequences just as firmly. Judge Lauren Lake explains that exclusion ends legal responsibility, but does not erase past involvement or emotional bonds. The court encourages honesty moving forward, particularly where children have formed attachments. These moments reflect themes commonly explored in Adoption Stories full episodes, where biology and caregiving roles diverge, creating complex emotional outcomes beyond legal definitions. Adult children present in the courtroom bring the long-term impact into sharp focus. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges their testimony as evidence of harm that cannot be undone by a single ruling. She explains that while the law can establish paternity, it cannot restore lost years. This acknowledgement resonates strongly with Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where healing begins only after truth is accepted, even when that truth arrives late. The judge also addresses how repeated denial and inconsistent involvement can be more damaging than absence. She explains that children experience instability when a parent appears only intermittently, offering promises without follow-through. While the court cannot mandate emotional presence, it can enforce consistency through legal responsibility. This reinforces the broader concept of justice in jurisprudence, where the law seeks to reduce harm even when it cannot fully repair it. As final decisions are announced, reactions across the courtroom vary. Some individuals show relief, believing uncertainty has finally ended. Others display visible regret, realizing that the truth they feared is now permanent. Judge Lauren Lake addresses this directly, stating that people regret taking DNA tests not because the tests are wrong, but because truth removes the comfort of denial. This statement captures why DNA evidence is often described as life-altering in the game, changing attorney podcast discussions. The court also revisits the principle of adverse inference in Evidence Act contexts. Judge Lauren Lake explains that earlier refusals, delays, or inconsistencies weighed heavily in how the court evaluated credibility. Participants are reminded that cooperation with testing and transparency protects legal standing, while resistance often damages it. This lesson is presented not as punishment, but as instruction for anyone facing similar disputes in the future. Another critical point emphasized is the role of honesty in co-parenting moving forward. The court explains that once legal questions are resolved, parents must shift focus from conflict to cooperation. Judge Lauren Lake stresses that the courtroom is not the end of responsibility, but the beginning of a defined path forward. Parenting plans, support enforcement, and visitation structures all depend on adults accepting outcomes without revisiting settled questions. The final descriptions also highlight how modern courts reflect social change. Casual relationships, online connections, and blended families are now common sources of legal conflict. The court does not judge these lifestyles, but it does hold individuals accountable for the consequences that follow. This reinforces a recurring message. Technology and freedom do not remove responsibility. DNA testing simply ensures that responsibility is correctly assigned. Judge Lauren Lake closes by addressing the broader impact of these rulings. She explains that every decision sets precedent not only for the families involved, but for how society understands accountability. Children deserve clarity, stability, and support, regardless of adult conflict. The court's role is to enforce that principle, even when outcomes are uncomfortable. As participants prepare to leave, the atmosphere is no longer tense but heavy with finality. Some families leave with confirmed answers and legal structure. Others leave confronting new realities that demand adjustment. No one leaves unchanged. The description makes clear that the court does not promise happiness, reconciliation, or forgiveness. It promises truth, grounded in evidence. In the end, these proceedings demonstrate that DNA testing is not about accusation, but about resolution. It closes questions that linger for decades and forces forward movement. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom stands as a place where speculation ends, facts prevail, and responsibility is clearly defined. The law does not soften truth, but it provides a framework to live with it. This final segment reinforces the core message carried throughout the cases. When evidence speaks, arguments fall silent, denial loses ground, and life must proceed under verified reality. The courtroom becomes not a stage for conflict, but a final checkpoint where truth is recorded, obligations are assigned, and the future is no longer uncertain.